you see this woman? She's the most powerful CEO in the country, and in 10 seconds, she's going to be forced to sign her own death warrant. The security guard she pays millions, they're the ones holding the knife. Her only hope is a man she called invisible this morning. She's signing help with a trembling hand, praying the janitor she mocked remembers his training. Lucas has 5 seconds to decide. Does he save the woman who tried to fire him, or does he let the Ice Queen finally melt? But wait until you see what Julian was actually hiding under that table. It changes everything. If this story resonates with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, Lucas and I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. You don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The scent of industrial lemon wax and the rhythmic low hum of the floor buffer were the only constants in Lucas Bennett's world. At 4 a.m., the lobby of the Sterling Grand was a cathedral of marble and glass, and Lucas was its silent caretaker. He moved with a practiced athletic grace, his calloused hands steady on the machine. He was thinking of Sophie. He'd spent the previous evening practicing the ASL signs for Butterfly and Dream with her, her small, joyful face the only light in their cramped apartment. The heavy brass doors swung open, shattering the silence. Kaelithia Sterling marched in, a whirlwind of sharp tailoring and expensive perfume that smelled like cold lilies. She was flanked by Julian Drax, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, and a trail of exhausted assistants. Lucas pulled the buffer to a stop, stepping back to give them a wide berth. He kept his head down, a ghost in a navy blue jumpsuit. "I told you, Julian, the merger papers must be ready by dawn," Kaelithia's voice rang out, sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't care about the logistics. I care about results." She didn't see the caution wet floor sign. Her 6-inch stiletto hit a patch of damp marble, and she stumbled, her leather portfolio slipping from her hand. Papers scattered like wounded birds across the wet floor. Lucas was moving before he could think. He dropped to one knee, reaching out to help her steady herself. "Ma'am, careful. It's still—" Kaelithia jerked her arm away as if his touch were acidic. She regained her balance, her face flushed with a mixture of shock and instant searing rage. She looked down at her ruined silk skirt, then at the man kneeling before her. "You," she hissed, her eyes, a piercing icy blue, locked onto his. "Look at what you've done. Do you have any idea what this suit costs? It's more than you make in a year." "I'm sorry, Miss Sterling," Lucas said, his voice calm, though his chest tightened. He stayed on his knee, reaching for the papers. "The sign was right there. Don't make excuses for your incompetence," she snapped, her voice rising, echoing through the empty lobby. She turned to the hotel manager, who'd come scurrying out of the shadows. "Why is this person still here? He's a walking liability. He's made a mess of my entrance and ruined my morning. Clean this up, and when I come back down, I don't want to see his face in this building again." Julian Drax watched with a smirk, his eyes lingering on Lucas with a predatory amusement. "He's just the help, Kay. Don't let the small people ruin your mood." Kaelithia didn't even look back at Lucas. She stepped over a stack of his carefully organized cleaning supplies, her heel grinding into a microfiber cloth he'd dropped. Lucas watched her go, his fingers curled into a tight fist against the cold marble. He felt the familiar burn of justified rage, not because she was rich, but because she looked at him as if he weren't even human. He thought of Sophie's school tuition, the looming rent, and the dignity he tried so hard to maintain. If you were Lucas, would you have stood up for yourself in that moment, or would you have stayed quiet to protect your job for your daughter's sake? Let us know in the comments. The manager's office was a glass-walled box that overlooked the service entrance, a constant reminder of where the help belonged. Mr. Henderson, a man whose spine seemed permanently curved from years of bowing to the elite, wouldn't look Lucas in the eye. "She wants you gone, Lucas," Henderson whispered, fidgeting with a paperweight. "I managed to talk her into a week's suspension without pay instead of an immediate firing, but only because I told her you were mentally slow and didn't know better. I'm sorry, son." Lucas felt a sharp spark of indignation. Mentally slow? He was a man who had spent 6 years in military intelligence, a specialist in nonverbal communication and behavioral patterns before the world had collapsed around him. He had left that life when his wife, Elena, passed away, choosing the invisibility of a janitor's uniform so he could be 100% present for the person who needed him most. "A week without pay is 3 weeks of Sophie's speech therapy, Mr. Henderson," Lucas said, his voice a low, vibrating chord of restrained frustration. I know. Just stay out of sight. Go home." Lucas didn't argue. He never did. He changed out of his jumpsuit, the fabric of his own clothes, a well-worn but clean flannel shirt, feeling like a second skin. As he walked toward the employee exit, he passed the Wall of Founders in the executive corridor. His eyes lingered on a vintage photograph of a young Kaelithia Sterling. She was standing next to a small boy who was holding a set of hearing aids in his hand. The boy was signing something, the sign for Together. Lucas paused. A shadow of a memory crossed his face. He knew that sign. He knew it because his world was built on it. Half an hour later, the heavy iron bolt of his apartment door slid home. The apartment was small, smelling of cinnamon and old books, a stark contrast to the sterile, expensive scent of the Sterling Grand. A small whirlwind of pigtails and denim tackled his waist. Sophie, 7 years old and radiant, looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. She didn't need to hear his voice to know something was wrong. Her hands moved with lightning speed. Sign. "Papa, why are you home early? Is the big glass house broken?" Lucas knelt, his large, calloused hands softening as they moved through the air. His movements were fluid, a silent dance of fatherly love. Sign. "The glass house is fine, Peamout. Papa just missed you too much today. Want to practice our secret language?" Sophie giggled, the sound a soft melodic vibration. They sat on the floor, and for the next hour, the world of billionaire CEOs and cruel humiliations vanished. Lucas wasn't a janitor here. He was a king, a teacher, and a protector. He had mastered ASL not just to communicate with his daughter, but to ensure she never felt less than in a world that shouted too loud. But as he tucked her into bed later, his mind drifted back to the hotel. He had noticed something in the lobby earlier, something Julian Drax had done. Julian had been holding Kaelithia's arm, but his grip hadn't been supportive. His thumb had been pressed hard into the radial nerve of her wrist, a compliance hold. Lucas's military training hummed beneath his skin. Most people saw a businessman escorting a CEO. Lucas saw a predator corralling his prey. The intuition that had kept Lucas alive during 2 tours of duty wouldn't let him sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the white-knuckled grip Julian Drax had on Kaelithia's arm. It wasn't the grip of a lover or a colleague. It was the grip of a man controlling a hostage. "Sophie, honey, Mrs. Gable from downstairs is going to sit with you for an hour, okay?" Lucas whispered, kissing his daughter's forehead. "Papa forgot his toolkit at the hotel. If I don't get it now, they might lock it up for the week." Sophie signed back, "Be careful, Papa. The glass house feels cold today." Lucas felt a chill. Children saw things adults missed. 10 minutes later, Lucas was slipping through the service entrance of the Sterling Grand. He knew the blind spots of the security cameras, knowledge he'd gained not for mischief, but for efficiency in his cleaning rounds. He reached the executive floor, the air here thinner, smelling of expensive leather and desperation. He heard it before he saw it, the heavy, muffled thud of a body hitting a mahogany door. "Sign it, Kaelithia," a voice hissed. It was Julian, but the oily charm was gone, replaced by a jagged, manic edge. "The board already thinks you're unstable. This voluntary resignation and transfer of shares is the only way you walk out of this suite alive." "You'll never get away with this," Kaelithia's voice was a ragged whisper. Lucas flattened himself against the cold marble wall of the corridor. He peered around the corner. Julian had Kaelithia pinned against the door of the private penthouse elevator. In his right hand, tucked low against her ribs where the cameras couldn't see, was a serrated tactical knife. The blade was pressed firmly into the silk of her blouse.
Kaelithia looked pale, her usual mask of iron completely shattered. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically across the hallway. She saw him. For a heartbeat, she saw the flash of her old arrogance, the urge to scream, to command. But then she realized how Lucas was standing, weight balanced on the balls of his feet, eyes scanning the room like a predator's. She realized he wasn't just a janitor. Julian pulled her closer, his back to Lucas. "We're going to the boardroom. You're going to smile, you're going to sign, and then I'm going to personally escort you to the airport. Move." As Julian forced her toward the service elevator, the one Lucas usually used, Kaelithia did something that made Lucas's heart stop. She didn't scream, she didn't struggle. Her left hand, hidden from Julian's view by her own body, dropped to her side. Her fingers began to move with a frantic, trembling precision. Help, knife, room 40, help. It was the same language Lucas spoke every night with Sophie. It was the secret language of the vulnerable. "Keep your head down, bitch," Julian growled, shoving her into the service elevator. The doors began to close. Lucas didn't jump in. He knew better than to corner a man with a knife in a confined space. Instead, he waited for the floor indicator to move. 40, the executive boardroom. Lucas didn't call the police, not yet. He knew the hotel security was on Julian's payroll. He'd seen them sharing drinks at the local pub. He was alone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his heavy, industrial-grade master key. "I'm coming, Kaelithia," he whispered to the empty hallway. Kaelithia chose to trust a man she had just humiliated because he was the only one who understood her silent plea. Have you ever had to trust someone you didn't like in a moment of crisis? Tell us your story in the comments.
The service stairs were a vertical labyrinth of concrete and shadow, a world away from the plush carpets of the guest floors. Lucas took them 3 at a time, his breath rhythmic and controlled. As he climbed, his mind drifted, a survival mechanism from his time in the field, to the small, sun-drenched kitchen of his apartment. He could almost smell the toasted sourdough and the cheap, sweet strawberry jam Sophie loved. He remembered the way she would sit on the counter, her small feet swinging, signing, "More, Papa, more," with a sticky grin. That tiny world, built on a janitor's wage and a father's devotion, was filled with a warmth that the Sterling Grand could never manufacture. In that kitchen, Lucas wasn't a servant or a ghost. He was the center of a universe. He was rich in every way that mattered. 40 floors up, the executive boardroom was a tomb of glass and polished ebony. Kaelithia sat at the head of the table, the seat she had fought, bled, and sacrificed her personal life to occupy. The air was pressurized, filtered, and smelled faintly of nothing. Julian stood behind her, his hand resting with terrifying familiarity on her shoulder, the knife folded but still gripped firmly in his palm against her neck. Julian leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. "The clock is ticking, Kaelithia. Don't make me get messy in this beautiful room." Suddenly, the vents above the boardroom rattled. It was a faint sound, masked by the hum of the high-end HVAC system, but Kaelithia's eyes flickered upward. She didn't see a hero in a suit. She didn't see a police squad. She saw the glint of a steel master key through the slats of the ventilation cover. Lucas was there. The nobody was in the ceiling. Julian's burner phone buzzed against the ebony table, a harsh, vibrating intrusion. He scowled, glancing at the caller ID. "Stay put," he hissed at Kaelithia, backing toward the far end of the expansive boardroom to take the call. He kept the knife visible, a silent promise of what would happen if she screamed. In the sudden, heavy silence of the room, Kaelithia looked up at the ceiling tile Lucas had shifted. She could see the shadow of his face, the steady blue of his eyes. "Why?" she mouthed, her voice a ghost of a sound. "Why are you doing this after what I said to you?" Lucas lowered himself slightly, his voice a sandpaper whisper that barely traveled 3 feet. "I didn't do it for the CEO," he said. "I did it for the girl in the photo who knew how to sign together. Kaelithia's breath hitched. She hadn't thought about that photo in years. The one with her younger brother, Leo. Leo was the only one who didn't want anything from me, she whispered, her eyes brimming with a different kind of pain. When he died, I realized that in this world, if you aren't the hammer, you're the nail. I chose to be the hammer. I thought if I became untouchable, I'd never feel that kind of loss again. I turned into the very thing I hated just to survive Julian and men like him. Dignity isn't about how many people you can crush, Miss Sterling, Lucas replied softly. He thought of Elena, the way her laughter used to fill their small kitchen before the accident. I was an operative for years. I've seen the world's most powerful men beg for a drink of water. When my wife died, I realized the only thing that mattered was being there to catch my daughter when she fell. I chose the broom because it meant I could be a father first and a ghost second. I don't need the world to see me as long as she does. Kaelithia looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the scars on his knuckles, the weariness in his posture, and the incredible quiet strength of a man who didn't need a title to have power. She realized that while she had been building a fortress, she had actually been building a cage. Lucas, in his simple navy jumpsuit, was freer than she had ever been. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words tasting like ash and honesty, "for everything." "Save the apologies for later," Lucas said, his eyes shifting back to Julian, who was hanging up the phone. "When I give the signal, drop to the floor. Don't look back." Kaelithia realized that her coldness was just a shield for her past pain. Do you think it's possible for someone to truly change after a life-altering experience, or are first impressions always the truth? Share your thoughts below. Julian was pacing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette sharp against the rising dawn. The sun was beginning to bleed over the city skyline, a bruised purple and gold that seemed at odds with the violence in the room. He was arguing with someone on the phone about a cleanup crew and a waiting car. Lucas reached down through the gap in the ceiling tiles, his hand steady. "Take this," he whispered. Kaelithia reached up, her fingers brushing against his. He handed her a small, heavy object wrapped in a microfiber cleaning cloth. It was his heavy-duty magnetic doorstop, a solid hunk of industrial steel. "When he comes back to make you sign, he's going to put his hand on your shoulder again," Lucas instructed, his voice a calm anchor in her sea of panic. "I need you to be still. I'm going to create a distraction. When the lights go, you roll to the left, away from the knife. Do you understand?" Kaelithia gripped the cold steel of the doorstop. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one giving orders, and strangely, she felt more powerful than she ever had behind a desk. She looked up at the man in the ceiling. In the dim light of the vent, Lucas's face was a study in quiet intensity. He wasn't looking at her as a boss or a billionaire. He was looking at her as a teammate. "Why are you so calm?" she whispered, her voice trembling only slightly. "Because I know what I'm fighting for," Lucas said. "My daughter is waiting for me to take her to the park this afternoon. I don't plan on being late." Kaelithia felt a lump in her throat. For a brief, fragile moment, the boardroom and the billion-dollar empire vanished. They were just two people trapped in a high-stakes game of survival, bound by a shared language and a mutual need to see another day. The class divide that had seemed like a canyon that morning was now nothing more than a crack in the floor. "I have a park I used to take to Leo to," Kaelithia said, a soft, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in years. "It has the best view of the river. If we get out of this, I'd like to see it again." "You will," Lucas promised. The bond between them was thin but unbreakable, forged in the silence of the boardroom. She saw the man, not the uniform. He saw the woman, not the title. The moment was shattered as Julian slammed his phone shut. "Time's up, Kaelithia. The car is downstairs. Sign the damn papers or I swear I'll make sure you never see another sunrise." He marched back toward the table, the knife clicking open with a predatory snick.
Kaelithia tucked the doorstop into the folds of her skirt, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked up one last time, catching the glint of Lucas's eyes. "Together?" she signed, her fingers moving small and low beneath the table. Lucas signed back, a single firm movement of his hand. "Together."
Julian didn't just want Kaelithia's company, he wanted to break her spirit. He saw the way her eyes flickered toward the ceiling, the way her posture had shifted from defeated to expectant. He was a predator, and he could smell the hope. He stopped mid-stride, his eyes narrowing. "You're looking for a savior, Kay? Is that it?" He let out a dry, hacking laugh that echoed off the ebony walls. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled blue ID badge, Lucas's badge. He tossed it onto the table. "Did you think the man who cleans your toilets was actually coming to help you? The man you humiliated in front of everyone this morning?" Julian leaned over her, his shadow swallowing her small frame. "I caught him in the stairwell 20 minutes ago. Do you know what he did? He didn't fight. He didn't scream for help." Kaelithia stared at the badge. Lucas's face looked back at her, handsome, calm and steady, the incompetent liability she had tried to fire. "He took $5,000 to give me his master keys and the maintenance codes for the boardrooms," Julian lied, his voice a smooth, poisonous silk. "He told me he had a daughter to look after and that a woman who treats people like garbage deserves to lose everything. He's probably halfway home by now, laughing at how easy it was to sell out the Ice Queen." The words hit Kaelithia harder than a physical blow. The fragile bond they had just built, the silent signs, the promise of the park, it all felt like a cruel, elaborate joke. "Of course he betrayed me," she thought, her heart turning to lead. "Why wouldn't he? I gave him every reason to hate me." She looked at the gold pen. The steel doorstop in her skirt felt like a mocking weight. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable for the first time in a decade, and in return she had been sold for a handful of cash by the only person who seemed to see her soul. "Sign it," Julian commanded, his hand clamping down on her shoulder, the knife hovering inches from her throat. "The help isn't coming for you, Kaelithia. No one is." Above them, in the darkness of the vent, Lucas felt a cold fury he hadn't experienced since the day his wife was taken from him. He saw Kaelithia's hand tremble. He saw the light die in her eyes, replaced by a devastating, familiar loneliness. He wanted to scream that it was a lie, but Julian was waiting for a sound. He was baiting him. Kaelithia picked up the pen. Her hand shook so violently the gold nib scratched against the expensive paper. She felt truly, utterly alone. The shatter point had arrived, the moment where the world's most powerful woman realized that her money, her title, and her arrogance had left her with nothing but a traitor's memory and a cold blade. I'll sign," she whispered, her voice breaking. Julian smirked, looking toward the ceiling as if he could see Lucas through the steel. "That's my girl. Smart, unlike your little janitor friend." He leaned in to watch her sign, his guard dropping for a fraction of a second as he tasted victory. He didn't see the shadow move above him. He didn't see the ceiling tiles slide silently back into place. Kaelithia's pen touched the paper. The gold nib left a jagged, ink-stained trail, a scar on the document that would end her career. Julian's hand tightened on her shoulder, his breath a triumphant hiss against her neck. Finally, a sensible woman. "Not yet," a voice rang out, vibrating with an authority that didn't belong to a janitor. The ceiling tile didn't just slide, it exploded downward. Lucas Bant descended like a shadow, landing with a heavy tactical thud on the ebony table. Before Julian could react, Lucas swept his leg across the surface, scattering the documents and the gold pen like chaff in the wind. Julian recoiled,
reaching for the knife in his waistband, but he was too slow. Lucas was a blur of controlled motion. He didn't use a weapon. He used the industrial-grade master key and a microfiber cloth, wrapping Julian's wrist in a blindingly fast joint lock that sent the blade clattering across the marble floor. "You're a dead man, Bennett," Julian screamed, his face contorted in a mask of ugly, aristocratic rage. I told her you sold her out. You're just a pathetic beggar looking for a payday." Lucas didn't argue. He didn't need to. He reached into his jumpsuit pocket and pulled out a small, high-tech transmitter, not a janitor's tool, but a piece of equipment from his former life. He tapped a button. Suddenly, the massive 100-inch video conferencing screen on the boardroom wall flickered to life. It wasn't a stock ticker or a logo. It was a live, high-definition recording of the last 10 minutes. Julian's own voice blasted through the room's surround sound speakers, loud and damning. "The board already thinks you're unstable. This voluntary resignation is the only way you walk out of this suite alive." Julian froze, his face drained of all color, turning a sickly translucent gray. But the grand exposure wasn't over. The screen split. On the other side of the feed was the city police commissioner and the Sterling Grand's primary board of investors, watching from a secure location. "We heard it all, Julian," the commissioner's voice boomed through the speakers, "and we have the GPS data from your cleanup crew. They were intercepted 3 blocks away. It's over." Lucas released Julian's arm, stepping back with the calm dignity of a man who had already won. He looked at Kaelithia. She was still in her chair, her chest heaving, her eyes wide as she looked from the screen to the man standing before her. "I never took his money, Kaelithia," Lucas said, his voice low and steady. "I don't have a price, but I do have a daughter who needs to know her father is a man of his word." Kaelithia felt the weight in her chest shatter, replaced by a surge of overwhelming relief and a burning, white-hot shame for ever doubting him. She stood up, her legs shaking, and walked towards Julian. He looked small now, a pathetic, cornered rat. "You thought I was alone," she said, her voice regaining its iron edge, but this time it was tempered with a new kind of strength. She turned to Lucas, and for the first time in front of the cameras and the board, she didn't see a janitor. She saw the man who saved her life twice, once from a knife and once from her own cold heart.
The chaos of sirens and shouting eventually faded into the rhythmic, low-frequency hum of the city waking up. Julian was led out in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his legacy replaced by a mugshot. The boardroom, once a sight of terror, was now just a room filled with early morning light. Kaelithia stood by the window, watching the police cars pull away. She turned to find Lucas gathering his master keys and the microfiber cloth he used as a weapon. He looked tired, the adrenaline receding to reveal the humble janitor beneath. "Lucas," she called out, her voice soft but clear. She walked toward him, stopping just outside his personal space. "The board, they want to offer you a massive settlement, a reward, enough to never have to pick up a broom again." Lucas paused, a small, tired smile tugging at the corner of his rugged mouth. "I didn't do it for the money, Kaelithia. I did it because everyone deserves to be heard, especially when they're silenced." "I know," she said, her eyes shimmering, "but I realized something today. I spent so much time looking down that I forgot to look around. I want to change that, not just for me, but for the company." 1 month later, the Sterling Grand looked the same on the outside, but the soul of the building had shifted. Kaelithia had established the Leo Sterling Foundation, a massive initiative dedicated to providing speech therapy, hearing aids, and sign language education for children of all hotel staff, free of charge. The most prestigious park in the city, the one with the river view, was filled with the sound of children playing. Lucas sat on a bench, a thermos of coffee in his hand, watching Sophie. She was on the swings, her face bright with pure, unadulterated joy. Beside her, a woman in a simple sundress was pushing the swing, her long hair catching the gold of the afternoon sun. It was Kaelithia. She wasn't the ice queen today.
She was just a woman who had finally learned the value of a single honest moment. She walked over to Lucas, sitting beside him. She didn't say anything at first. She just watched Sophie. Then she raised her hand and signed with a grace that showed she'd been practicing every day. Sign, "Thank you for showing me the way home." Lucas looked at her, his heart finally finding the peace he'd been searching for since he lost Elena. He didn't see a CEO, and she didn't see a janitor. They were just two souls who had found a common language in a world that often refuses to listen. He reached out, his hand covering hers for a brief, warm second, a promise of a future that had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with together. Lucas chose dignity over a payout, and Kaelithia chose to use her power to lift others up. If you were in Kaelithia's shoes, would you have the courage to admit you were wrong and change your whole life? Tell us your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories of justice and redemption. Thank you for watching another story of Lucas Bennett to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as wild and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So like the video and subscribe for more, because Lucas and I will be waiting for you tomorrow.